On August 19th of the 14th BC year, after a prolonged struggle with stomach and digestive issues, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus, the father of the nation, and the father of Tiberius Julius Caesar, closed his eyes forever. For Tiberius, a man raised with the highest republican principles, the death of his adoptive father was not just a personal loss, but a pivotal moment in the future of Rome. Since defeating Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra 44 years earlier, bringing an end to 6 long decades of civil war between Rome's vitriolic political factions, Caesar Augustus had legislated and bribed the Roman people into accepting golden chains of slavery, all while discreetly gathering the strength of Rome's legions unto himself. Now Tiberius, born of a patrician family whose Claudian name could be seen etched across the generations of the old republic, would be expected to step into Caesar Augustus's place. But would he? His mother, Livia Drusilla, wanted it. The Senate would likely ask for it, and the legions would support it. However, in order to take it, Tiberius, whose republican sentiments chafed at the very idea of monarchy and the absolute rule of one man, would have to become the thing he despised most: master of willing slaves. Leaving the deceased body of Caesar Augustus in the same room where his father, Gaius Octavius Thurinus, had died almost 73 years earlier, Tiberius and Livia closed the door behind them. Approaching the waiting group of senators who had arrived from Rome with salutations and prayers for the Pater Patriae, Tiberius and his mother informed them that Caesar Augustus had fallen asleep and was resting. They advised the senators to return the following day, while promising to post bulletins on the door in the interim to keep everyone apprised of Augustus's health. As the senators departed, Tiberius felt the weight of Rome's future shift onto his shoulders. In order to ascend to the authority of Caesar Augustus and ensure a continuation of the Pax Romana to which his adopted father had dedicated the last 4 decades of his life, sacrifices had to be made. The moment word got out that the father of the nation was dead, an attempt to rescue from captivity Posthumus Agrippa, Augustus's last living grandson, was sure to be launched by those who still supported the parties of Julia, Augustus's daughter, and Julilla, his granddaughter. The 3 exiles could then be rushed to join Augustus's last granddaughter, Agrippina, whose husband, Germanicus, now commanded 8 full legions in Germania. At the head of those legions, Posthumus Agrippa, spurred on by the ambitions of his mother and sisters, could easily march on Rome and unseat the Claudians. Civil war would once again be unleashed. And so, actions were swiftly taken. Around the 21st of August, after a few days of continuous bulletins on the door stating that there was no change in Augustus's health, and that the Pater Patriae continued to rest in a weakened state, a Roman centurion named Gaius Sallustius Crispus arrived at Nola. Crispus was the grand-nephew and adopted son of the historian Sallust, a man who had supported Julius Caesar during the civil wars. Like many military men who had risen in the decades following the dictator's assassination, Crispus rose to prominence, serving Caesar Augustus as both a centurion and a personal administrative assistant. Crispus announced to Tiberius, Livia, and those surrounding them that Posthumus Agrippa, Caesar Augustus's 23-year-old grandson, was dead, executed by the commander of the guard stationed at Planasia by the father of the nation himself. With a bow to Tiberius, Crispus declared, "The orders have been carried out." But Tiberius recoiled. "I gave no such orders." He vehemently denied commanding the execution of Posthumus Agrippa. Tiberius suggested that the commander of the guard had acted on his own accord, even accusing Crispus of orchestrating the murder. Tiberius also hinted that the orders might have been forged, or even written by Caesar Augustus himself. Finally, Tiberius announced his intention to open a full senatorial investigation upon their return to Rome. Deferring to Tiberius's judgment, the matter was dropped, for now. Finally, with the threat of posthumous Agrippa eliminated, ensuring a seamless transfer of imperial power, Tiberius and his mother formally proclaimed to the gathered citizens of Nola that the Roman imperator, Caesar Augustus, was dead. Sometime after the 21st, a solemn procession left the town of Nola, escorting the body of Caesar Augustus on a richly decorated funeral bier, adorned with laurel wreaths and draped in purple cloth. At the head of the procession walked Tiberius and his mother, Livia Drusilla, their faces set in stoic dignity as they bore the weight of an empire's grief. Journeying along the Via Appia and other major roads, the procession stopped in various towns. There, local magistrates presented eulogies beneath statues of Caesar Augustus that were adorned with garlands. The townsfolk joined their mourning cries with those of the imperial family, their wails echoing through the streets. Altars were erected, and sacrifices offered. By August 31st, Tiberius and Livia, leading the funeral procession, arrived in Rome, a city shrouded in mourning. The Roman people, overcome with grief, had already begun preparations for the grand state funeral. Statues were dressed in mourning garb, wooden seats were meticulously arranged for the nobility, and a podium was set up for the eulogists and the actors chosen to don the masks of Caesar Augustus's ancestors. At the city gates, the body of Augustus was transferred to a contingent of Praetorian guards. These elite soldiers escorted the bier part of the way through Rome before handing it over to a group of noble equities, entrusted with the honour of carrying it through the final stretch to the atrium of Caesar Augustus's home. There, the body was laid in state, its feet directed toward the entrance, allowing the people of Rome to file past and pay their respects in solemn tribute before the funeral. In the early days of September, the Senate formally visited Tiberius at his residence. They urged him to assume the vacant offices left by Caesar Augustus. But Tiberius, steadfast in his resolve, declined, preferring to concentrate on the forthcoming funeral. He produced a document authored by Augustus himself, outlining meticulous instructions for the funeral arrangements, which were to span several days. Despite the Senate's persistent delegations, pleading for him to step into the role and end the state's uncertainty, Tiberius remained resolute in his refusal. During one such visit, Tiberius, likely invoking his advanced age as a reason for hesitating to assume the full weight of Augustus's vast responsibilities, subtly suggested a division of duties between himself and the Senate. This proposal sparked an indignant response from one of the senators, Gaius Asinius Gallus, who, viewing Tiberius's reluctance as mere political manoeuvring, demanded, "Then name which part of the empire you want for yourself." The sharpness of Gallus's words struck a nerve with Tiberius. Gallus, the husband of Tiberius's first wife, Vipsania, and the man who had raised his son, Drusus, during Tiberius's exile, quickly sensed the tension. The look of disapproval on Tiberius's face prompted Gallus to retreat, clarifying that he had merely meant to highlight the impracticality of dividing the empire's governance. Next, the Senate turned its attention to the matter of Caesar Augustus's apotheosis. After all, omens had been seen. Lightning had struck a single letter on one of Augustus's statues, leaving behind the word Caesar, the ancient Etruscan term for God. A celestial comet had streaked across the sky for nearly a week, a sign from the heavens of Augustus's deification. Reports from Gaul told of a statue of Augustus that wept. Moreover, Livia Drusilla, Augustus's widow, had recently dreamt of her husband being carried off to the gods by a celestial host. With such prodigious signs overwhelming the Senate, it was decided by a unanimous vote to bestow upon Caesar Augustus the highest honor of divine worship. Finally, on September 17th, during a critical Senate meeting, Tiberius yielded to their persistent demands. Although he had long held the administrative and political powers conferred upon him by Caesar Augustus, Tiberius Julius Caesar formally accepted the titles of Augustus and Pater Patriae. Yet, he firmly rejected the civic crown, a military honor bestowed upon Julius Caesar at age 19 for saving Roman lives in battle, and then later offered to Augustus as a symbol of the lives saved through his role in ending the civil wars. Tiberius refused to embrace such symbolic honors. He also declined the Senate's attempts to bestow upon him any of the quasi-religious titles that had been created for Augustus over the decades. With these formalities resolved, Tiberius could now permit the grand and solemn funeral of his father, Caesar Augustus, to proceed. The funeral procession for Caesar Augustus began on September 18th, unfolding with solemn grandeur. An army of musicians led the way, their dirges echoing through the streets. They were followed by a multitude of professional mourners whose wails and breast-beatings were amplified by the wax death masks of Augustus's ancestors worn on their faces. The freshly washed body of Augustus lay on its ornate funeral bier, adorned in his finest clothing and draped in regal purple. Tiberius, flanked by his mother Livia, his son Drusus, and his daughter-in-law Livilla, led the procession, their mourning togas and dishevelled hair reflecting the gravity of their loss. The remainder of the imperial family followed closely behind. The Senate, along with local magistrates, trailed the imperial family, followed by the noble equestrians, the military legates, and the soldiers, with the Praetorian Guard bringing up the rear. As the great train of mourners wove its way through the streets of Rome, participants chanted the name of the deceased in rhythmic triads, Augustus, 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 a ritual cry to release his spirit from the bonds of the earthly realm. For 5 days, temples across the city held special services, with priests, pontifexes, flamen, augurs, and vestal virgins performing sacrifices to appease the gods and ease Caesar Augustus's transition into the afterlife. On the podium reserved for the immediate family and Rome's most important figures, actors donned the death masks of Augustus's most notable ancestors, including his biological father, Gaius Octavius Thurinus, and his adoptive father, the dictator Gaius Julius Caesar. Tiberius, Augustus's primary heir, delivered the main eulogy, praising his father's achievements and extolling his virtues to the weeping masses. Numerous other prominent Romans and friends offered their tributes, including Tiberius's son, Drusus Julius Caesar, who spoke of the virtues of his grandfather. After all the ceremonies and eulogies, feasts and sacrifices, prayers and dirges, the funeral bier was moved from the Forum Romanum. Augustus's body was laid on the funeral pyre constructed on the Campus Martius. On September 23rd, amidst the weeping and wailing of the Roman people, the body of Caesar Augustus was consumed in flame. Afterwards, his remains were gathered and ritually deposited in the mausoleum of Augustus, reuniting the father of the nation with Marcus Agrippa, his nephew Marcellus, his stepson Drusus, and his adopted sons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar. Near the end of September, Tiberius met again with the Senate. Extracting the last will and testament of Caesar Augustus from the safekeeping of the Vestal Virgins, where Augustus had deposited his most recent copy on April 13th of the previous year, the will was read aloud. written in the hand of Caesar Augustus. The first line began with, "Since cruel fate has snatched from me my sons, Gaius and Lucius, be Tiberius Caesar my heir." As primary heir to Caesar Augustus, Tiberius inherited 2/3 of an estate valued at approximately 150 million sesterces. Livia Drusilla, Caesar Augustus's widow, inherited the final third of his estate, along with a singular honour never before bestowed upon a woman. Livia Drusilla was posthumously adopted into the family of the Julii, and afterwards known as Julia Augusta. In the event that his primary heirs predeceased him, Caesar Augustus named Germanicus Julius Caesar as his secondary heir for 2/3 of his estate, and Drusus Julius Caesar to inherit the remaining 1/3. As tertiary heirs, his widow's grandson, Claudius, was named in equal portion to the surviving sons of Germanicus. To the Roman people, Caesar Augustus left instructions to distribute a sum total of 40 million sesterces. A further legacy of 3.5 million sesterces was to be distributed evenly among the various tribal and plebeian associations of Rome. For the military, Caesar Augustus bequeathed 1,000 sesterces to each member of the Praetorian Guard, 500 sesterces to each member of the urban cohorts, and 300 sesterces to each soldier stationed in Rome's legions. In the next section of Caesar Augustus's will, generous personal bequests were left to many friends and distinguished members of government. These bequests came with a conditional 1-year wait for the legatees to be paid, as all available coin was allocated for paying the public legacies to the Roman people and the military. Caesar Augustus explained in his will that the time was needed for his heirs to raise further funds because, although he had received upwards of almost 1.5 billion sesterces over the previous 20 years from legacies bequeathed to him by friends, Augustus's heirs would receive only the 150 million sesterces that represented the personal wealth he had inherited from his own fathers. The rest of the wealth left to Caesar Augustus had been used in service to the state. The name of his last living grandson, Posthumus Agrippa, did not appear in Caesar Augustus's will, nor was a senatorial investigation into his sudden death ever opened. Caesar Augustus did, however, unexpectedly bequeath a small legacy to his daughter, Julia, who still lived in exile in the town of Rhegium. But despite this small legacy, the divine Augustus's will reiterated his wishes that his daughter, Julia Augustifilia, never be permitted to return to Rome, and that her remains be forbidden from being placed within the mausoleum of Augustus. But Tiberius had other plans. The living allowance that Caesar Augustus had provided for his exiled daughter, Tiberius ruthlessly cut off. He not only stripped Julia of her income, but he also ordered that she be confined to a single room within her villa. Bereft of financial support and freedom, Julia Caesaris Filia, the woman for whom Tiberius had been forced to divorce his beloved Vipsania in order to marry, the woman who had publicly humiliated him with her scandalous love affairs with Gaius Gracchus and Iulus Antonius, the only daughter of Caesar Augustus, who had driven Tiberius from Rome, was now left to wither away in captivity and endure a final, slow punishment of starvation.